Welcome to my channel, where manga and anime stories come to life in audiobook form. Here you'll find manga-inspired adventures, anime-style fantasy, action-packed battles, dark mysteries, and emotional story arcs. From powerful heroes and crazy plot twists to supernatural worlds and unforgettable characters, there's always a new story waiting. If you've ever said just one more episode at 2 a.m., you'll fit right in. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Sal lay on the bed, watching Hannah get ready to leave. Noticing his gaze, Hannah flashed a faint smile. After tidying her clothes, Hannah loosely relaxed her waist and swept back her disheveled blonde hair with her gloved hand. "Don't get the wrong idea," she said with a playful look in her eyes. "It's just one night. Don't make the atmosphere weird for no reason. We have to see each other for 3 more years. Right?" Sal exhaled slowly and composed himself. "Of course." Sal smiled and sat up in bed. "I'll match whatever you want." Hannah picked up her shoes and giggled. "All right, just like you did just now." Hannah gave a final wink and walked out the door. Once the door closed and silence returned, Sal raised both hands above his head and cheered soundlessly. He had decided to respect all her opinions, worried that getting excited for no reason might cause a strange misunderstanding. Deep in his heart, Sal remained grateful that she had approached him first. At first, he thought being just friends was enough. He had only made the gauntlet because he was thankful for her heart in remembering he bought her coffee in the morning and even bringing materials. But when she told him how much stronger she felt through that gauntlet while by his side, "Phew, let's get a grip." Sal took a deep breath to clear his head, picked up the blanket that had fallen to the floor, and wrapped it around his body. He didn't want to harbor useless hope, but he wanted to share a few more nights like this with her. Turning his head, Sal could smell her faint perfume remaining in the room. Sal smiled and finally fell into a deep sleep. That day's schedule at Quest Academy started much later than usual, perhaps due to the grueling combat training conducted the day before. But Sal had absolutely no intention of wasting time rolling around in bed. Rather, he made up his mind to use these few hours to the fullest to catch up on delayed work. To express the feeling he felt right now, in one word, it was truly the best. No, perhaps he had never felt such an emotion in his entire life. Until now, Sal had always suffered from guilt that he was stealing and using others' abilities. His ability was certainly great, and it could look amazing in the eyes of others, but Sal himself always felt something was lacking. But now it was different. He had crafted a rare grade artifact on his very first attempt. Sal entered the workshop holding a cup of premium coffee in his hand. It was an expensive price, but he thought it was worth every penny thanks to the effect the coffee gave. Of course, he had to find a way to earn Q credits from now on. Today's goal was to find out how to sell items within the school. Since he also had the silver token given by Vila, Sal harbored an expectation that he might be able to start with appraiser work right away. Another thing he was curious about was the dress code, because some of the high-ranking students were proudly wearing armor instead of the unsightly gray uniforms. Now, the gray uniform is Sal's enemy. Sal guessed there would be an upper limit on the grade of equipment that could be worn, but among what he had seen so far, there were no items exceeding uncommon grade. In fact, even uncommon was on the rare side. The same thought occurred when he saw the second and third year seniors a few days ago. They were also wearing a kind of uniform, but it was a much more sophisticated and classy design. Anything seemed better than these shabby gray clothes issued to first-year freshmen. When he arrived at the workshop, a completely different scene from the day before unfolded. The form of tables arranged in a wide space was nowhere to be seen, and the spacing had widened so much that even the aisles between workbenches were narrow. He hadn't noticed yesterday, but there were also several private booths made of glass doors. Already, some students were immersed in precision work or study inside them. "Mr. Argento!" Porge's booming voice rang throughout the workshop. At that sound, a few people raised their heads from their desks, but no one looked disturbed. Rather, it felt strange that they didn't. Upgrade hasn't come yet. She's closer to being nocturnal than a morning person. Porge grabbed Sal's hand and shook it firmly. Sal had shaken off the previous incident after Upgrade's sincere apology and the fact that he had been excessive. He pointed to the various workbenches around them. "Want to have a proper tour this time?" "I'd like that, thank you. By the way, may I ask a few questions?" Sal asked cautiously as he followed Porge. Porge waved his hand and said, "Of course. You learn by asking questions. Ask anything." Sal took out the silver token and showed it to Porge. "What do I need to do to start earning Q credits with this?" "I was told it would help in opening trades." Porge snapped his fingers and smiled brightly. "A very good question. Then shall we start with that? Follow me." Sal naturally matched his pace, following the hulking Porge, who was wearing an apron. They passed several workbenches and headed inside. Porge looked back over his shoulder and pointed at the people around them. "The people working here right now are all third years or part of the GPP, that is, the Guild Partnership Program. Our school is the only certified professional crafter training institution in the city, so if a guild wants a certified artisan, they must get certification here unconditionally. As if to prove they belong to that program, some students raised their heads and waved familiarly to Sal. Porge pointed to the elevator line far away. Let's go up to the credit floor. Shall I refill your drink? As his gaze landed on Sal's coffee cup, a slight smile hung on the corners of his mouth. But there are no high-end drinks like this here. If you're going to work all night, go find Alex. He's one of our team, and he does alchemy as a side job. If you drink the coffee he makes, you could probably run a marathon here. In the direction Porge pointed, a man was smiling and raising a coffee cup in greeting. The elevator was much more spacious than any elevator Sal had ridden so far. Porge continued with informative words, like a treasure trove of information. A few days ago, an order for a Naginata blade came in, and the case alone was bigger than other elevators. This side is a custom-built elevator for large orders. It connects directly to the first basement level, so access to the loading dock is easy too. Conversely, if you go up, there's also a loading space for air delivery. Porge pointed here, and they're adding explanations, and after a while, pressed the button for a nearby floor. As they passed the first floor, a space like an industrial facility filled with numerous machines was visible beyond the glass doors. I'll show you there later, Porge said with a laugh. Let's find out how to earn credits first. Then let's go down to the manufacturing zone. Sal was grateful for the fact that he had a guide, and the time with this large man was enjoyable. Not long after, the elevator made a ding sound, and as the transparent doors opened, the transaction floor revealed itself. Unlike the workshop where everyone welcomed them with curious eyes and smiles, the expressions of the people here were the exact opposite. The luxurious interior decoration gave Sal a familiar feeling, and the contemptuous gazes sent by the neat and sophisticated employees standing around solidified that feeling further. Their uniforms were classy, and Sal was on the verge of snorting without realizing it. Is this perhaps an auction house? Porge blinked and looked back at Sal. How did you know? My father always took me to public auction houses and showed me how auction competition operates. My family runs a private auction house. Sal added a short explanation, thinking Porge might not know about his family. But surprisingly, Porge smiled and nodded. It's Argento Auction House, right? Pietro is a good person. I've worked with him a few times in the past. Sal burst into laughter looking at the hawk-like people in the room. The inside of their heads was clearly visible. To them, Porge and Sal were just a first-year student wearing a gray uniform and a worker from the workshop site wandering around with him. No matter how important Porge was in the production part, to these people, he was just a worthless existence since he didn't generate profit. Porge said to Sal with a slightly apologetic face. Can I speak here? The people here are somewhat picky, right? As Sal nodded and laughed, Porge laughed along. The man behind the counter managed to suppress at least a sigh. Welcome. That was all. He didn't introduce what services were available, nor did he say anything like, how can I help you? He just acknowledged their existence. Sal could feel that Porge was suppressing his anger. I was in the middle of giving a freshman a school tour, and since I'm here, I have a question. What is it? This time, a sigh properly burst out. The man dressed in a suit looked at Sal suspiciously. Porge ignored his sarcastic tone. What credit services are provided to guild token holders? Sal was about to put his hand in his pocket, but stopped when he saw Porge silently raising his hand to signal him to stop. The man behind the counter frowned. Credits are approved only in special cases. If the work is long and arduous, a basic allowance to compensate for profit loss is provided. In cases where urgent purchase is needed, overdrafts can be used and discounts on material purchases can be received. However, at least a bronze token holder is required for such things to be possible. The attitude was a mess, but the content was accurate. Sal thought he should acknowledge that point. Porge nodded and expressed his thanks. Then how about a silver token holder? To explain a bit more, there are two talents coming into our side, and the first is a tremendous appraiser. He identified an epic grade item in less than a minute. A guild saw that skill and gave him a silver token, and I told him he could get good conditions here. Porge whispered in a secretive tone. Silver token, epic grade? As if someone had slapped his cheek, shock spread across the man's face. After a while, that expression changed into a bright smile. He also leaned his body forward. If it's that level, we could try to coordinate on our side too. He typed something into the console behind the counter, put a tracker on his left eye, and organized the data. You say he can appraise up to epic grade, and is a certified appraiser? Should I write down Mr. Porge as the one who verified that? Porge shook his head and smiled. Upgrade personally guaranteed that friend skill, and Vila from the Reavers Guild did the same. The man paused his words for a moment, but soon continued his questions. This isn't something to proceed like this. I would like to meet that person directly and proceed with negotiations. At that moment, Porge's hand came out slightly below the counter and sent a signal to Sal to secretly hand over the token. Sal read the flow and readily handed the token. Porge, with a smile on his face, lifted the token and slid it lightly onto the counter. That friend entrusted me with full authority for the negotiation. Since he's from an auction family, he wants to proceed quietly. He doesn't want to look like he's competing with his father, Pietro Argento. Porge flipped the token over, showing Salvatore's name carved on it. The man didn't answer immediately, let out a long breath, and then smiled slowly. Is there any more effort I can make to close this deal? Porge nodded with a mischievous smile. That friend is also interested in crafting. I can organize a list of goods for you. If you send a budget proposal, I will try to persuade him accordingly. Sal thought he would be offended, but he looked rather relieved. The auction house here seemed to prefer solving problems with money. Maintaining his smile, he held out his hand somewhat reluctantly. We also agree to those conditions. I will draft a proposal and send it to the workshop by this morning. If the conditions are not to your liking, we can coordinate again to find a solution that suits both sides. Porge retrieved the silver tablet and put it in his pocket with a laugh. And the second talent is this friend right here. Sal pretended not to be surprised, but he couldn't get a sense of what move Porge was making at all. The man opposite sent a suspicious look, but since he had just finished negotiations with Porge, he didn't judge rashly. Porge pointed at Sal and said almost in a whisper, "Have you heard the news that a freshman smashed the skill register? That friend is..." At the same time, the sound of someone calling the employee was heard from behind the counter. Just a moment. Yes. Right now." The auction house employee raised his hand with a slightly frowning face and smiled politely. At the unexpected interruption, Porge was briefly flustered, but soon sent a signal with his eyes to Sal with an apologetic expression, and Sal waved his hand as if to say it was okay. Then, a dazzling beauty in a black suit approached from behind the desk. The employee who was responding before quietly moved to another area. "I apologize for the inconvenience. Due to an urgent executive meeting just now, I left my seat to my colleague. Securing core talent is a part we are always interested in, but sponsoring a first year with no concrete performance or guild support is difficult at present. The talent of the silver token you showed earlier is just a special case, but this person who came with you right now does not apply. We ask for your understanding." There was absolutely no sincerity in the smile she made as if sorry. Still, she was much more polite than the previous man. Sal shrugged his shoulders and made a face, saying, "Well, it can't be helped." She leaned her body slightly over the desk and spoke directly to Sal. "Since you came all this way, you can leave simple information. When the rankings come out at the end of this semester, we might be able to schedule a formal consultation then." Porge nodded. "It doesn't have an official name yet, but this friend has a high probability of becoming a mythos when he graduates. It's Mythos Crafter, the stage after legend and epic. The principal verified it personally, and they say there's only one with this ability in the world. He has no guild contracted yet either. But well, if the policy is such, we have to respect it. Let's talk again next semester. That fine with you, Mythos?" Porge's acting wasn't on the excellent side, but he had a knack for enduring without getting flustered. On the other hand, the female employee's eyes went wide and her face turned pale. Sal couldn't hold back his laughter because the situation was funny. "Sounds good, Mr. Porge. I guess I was still lacking a lot." "You said Mythos, right?" The woman spoke cautiously with a warm smile. "I apologize if you were offended by what happened earlier. However, as you both know, thousands of students enroll every year, and hundreds among them possess supporter skills capable of commercialization. They are even talents who were prominent where they lived." Vanessa observed the two people standing in front of her for a moment, then continued. "Due to Quest Academy's system, not every student remains until the end. That is why we consider contracts carefully. However, if we do sign a contract, we invest all resources for that person's success." Acknowledging her mistake, yet not lowering herself, Sal admired Vanessa's conversational skills and decided to willingly accept her sweet talk. Of course, he had no intention of contracting anything right today. The best strategy right now was to make them want more. Since all the initiative in the negotiation was with him, there was no need to rush. "I am Vanessa. If you don't mind, may I ask the name you registered at the academy?" Her smile turned even more charming. It seemed she was trying to slyly dig up information from Sal. Sal shook his head slightly, and Vanessa immediately moved on to the next topic. She seemed worried about offending him for no reason. "Then, let's talk assuming a contract has been made." She glanced at Porge as well and raised her eyebrows slightly. "Since you introduced Mythos to our side, are there any facilities or services you wish to use?" Porge smiled broadly and gestured for Sal to speak. "I'm a first year, and I have absolutely no resources. What I need right now is a method to generate profit and an environment where I can improve my skills. The Mythos Crafter ability allows me to restore and upgrade items, and furthermore create new inventions. Up to Mythos grade. Of course, Sal didn't know how to do that at all yet, but Vanessa didn't need to know that. My internal essence is insufficient to run large projects, and in the current situation, no matter how well I do, epic grade seems to be the limit. But if there are usable energy cores, much more work will be possible." Vanessa stared blankly at Sal. To speak so confidently, "Have you perhaps done a lot of crafting?" Sal noticed the challenge contained in Vanessa's tone at once, and willingly accepted it. I made a rare-grade gauntlet with a few scraps of metal and old gloves. I infused a specific person's essence to make it bound to the wearer and engraved a self-charging rune to enable self-energy supply. And yesterday, I restored a clumsily modified core to epic grade. Hearing about the gauntlet, Porge also opened his eyes wide in surprise. At a thought that suddenly occurred, Sal added, "There's one thing I want to make clear. I will not sign an exclusive contract with any place. I want to sell the items I make to other students too." Vanessa smiled and pointed at Porge. "Fortunately, we just happen to have a new appraiser candidate who will be joining us. If you receive certification from the appraiser, the item's quality and function are recognized as proven, so free trading among students is possible. Of course, since an exclusive contract could bring very large profits, it would be better to judge after hearing the proposals rather than unconditionally refusing." Observing the two's expressions, Vanessa did not push that topic any further. "Since you're still a first year, some buyers might try to lower the price at first. If you wish, we can handle the commercial parts on your behalf, including contract brokerage." Sal nodded. He liked that proposal quite a bit. However, he had a resolve not to negotiate anything right this day. He thought to see what conditions they would offer after building up more of a track record and making them feel thirsty. Above all, he was deeply grateful for Porge's help. Sal had a talent for reading people's abilities and selling goods, but he didn't know well about dealing with people and how to commercialize abilities. In that regard, Porge's advice was truly valuable. Vanessa handed Sal a customized gift bag filled with high-end souvenirs and practical items. She deliberately wrote down her contact information with an exaggerated gesture and handed it directly to Sal. "If there is anything you need or want to talk about our services, or if you just want to find out what work is done here, please contact me anytime." Sal held his breath until the elevator went down to the lower floor. As soon as the doors opened, he let out a long sigh. Porge laughed loudly. Was it quite nerve-wracking? He scratched his bushy beard and gestured to go towards the industrial zone. "But why did you act as if I were two people? Want to be exposed soon?" Porge shook his head and raised one finger. "Appraisal is the core of our business. Without an appraiser, you cannot value any item, and it is easy to become in a position subordinate to the guys above. When you craft, restore, or upgrade something, the only person who can judge whether it is truly usable or not is an appraiser. Just one appraiser certification? Everything works out well." Porge smiled slyly. "I might have been a bit selfish, but I wanted you to receive a salary from above while actually working down here with us. If that happens, you get a discount when buying goods from above, and you can also do side jobs with colleagues here. If someone makes, restores, or does something, they ask you for an appraisal, and you just receive some necessary materials. Down here, that finishes in a few seconds. But up there, administrative procedures, reports, it would take hours." Those words were sufficiently persuasive to Sal as well. And Sal was happy about the fact that he could spend more time in the workshop. Porge turned around again and raised a second finger. "Did you see them judging you without listening to a word? Isn't it ironic that the guys responsible for setting the value of goods actually have no eyes to see talent? The name crafter looks cool, but to craft an item for others take a long time. The success probability isn't certain, and material costs are enormous." Porge spoke as if shuddering, then glanced at Sal's eyes as he nodded. "On the other hand, appraisal uses only essence and takes much less time. So realistically, your main source of income will be appraisal. What we just did is we raised the value of the person named Salvatore to the fullest, making it so Salvatore can give work to Mythos. Doing the same work but earning double. Why should you earn only once?" Porge raised both hands as if that was too obvious. Sal laughed, but that peculiar skepticism did not leave. "It sounds plausible, but eventually it will be exposed. If they ask just one word to the dean, they will know immediately that I am one person." Porge wagged his finger. "The dean suggested creating another persona first, to protect your identity. So the dean, upgrade, and I will all acknowledge the existence of Mythos. So don't go blabbering about your ability. We don't want to attract useless attention." Sal nodded with surprised eyes. "Now let's finish the tour. You have to go to class, and I have a lot of work piled up too." Sal moved his steps following Porge to the industrial zone of the workshop. Some machines were cutting precision metal with lasers, and other sides were printing parts for assembly. Porge pointed to a printer. "There are essential parts like this. Instead of buying every time, we make them directly like this and include it in the unit cost. These machines start work immediately once you input the blueprint, and those blueprints can be bought from other students or bartered. There are quality differences for each blueprint, and later if you take the relevant module, you can try making new blueprints yourself too. Upgrade is incredibly strong in this area, so if you're interested, make sure to talk to her." Sal nodded and continued to follow Porge. The two stopped in front of a serve machine. "This guy is so amazing, I might become baggage soon. It's equipped with a mobile forge and even a functional furnace. Metal refining is excellent, but for blade crafting, it's even more killer. If you're interested in this area, tell me anytime. Porge placed both hands on his waist and looked at the equipment like a proud parent. The machine looked quite crude on the outside, but the blazing furnace was emitting light so hot Sal had to cover his eyes. Porge pointed in the opposite direction and led Sal. This side is precision tools for laser engraving. Porge opened a drawer under the equipment and spoke. Inside, colorful dust was piled up high. You must always keep the tray empty. This is rule number 1. Sal's eyes sparkled as soon as he saw the dust. The dust was pretty, but also because his ability recognized it as usable material. Where does this dust go? When Sal asked, Porge pushed the tray back in and said, sometimes the alchemy side takes it, but mostly we stabilize and dispose of it. There's almost no corner to utilize it. Walking a few minutes more, Porge arrived in front of a transparent door where faint light leaked out. The friends here technically belong to the production team too, but we classify most as the R&D part. It's a place where technology and magic are mixed, and this side is in charge of the Academy's infrastructure overall. Drop by sometime later if you have time. You might be able to learn something called magic programming. If you don't learn it here, you'd have to enter the advanced R&D course to learn it. With those words, Porge finished the tour and brought Sal to the floor where he first met Upgrade. I hope it was an informative and fun time. When the appraisal contract comes down, I'll put it on your desk. Porge stepped aside and pointed to a newly installed desk while they were away. These friends must have felt sorry about yesterday's incident. Since I was keeping you occupied, they wanted to prepare something cool for you. Sal looked around. Crafters pretending to be immersed in work were visible, but embarrassed smiles hung on everyone's faces. He was genuinely touched by this consideration and felt a pleasant surprise seeing Upgrade sitting in the chair next to his workbench. Porge cleared his throat and said, Upgrade insisted on sitting you in the seat next to her. That way I can watch you and tease you to my heart's content. Porge chuckled and left the spot, leaving the two behind. Sal approached his desk. A large box was placed on the desk. He stopped breathing as he opened the box. He couldn't know all the components, but each one was filled with high-end tools of at least rare grade. His eyes didn't react as intensely as expected, but he was already happy enough to fly away. Upgrade pulled her chair closer to his workbench, rested her elbows, supported her chin with both hands, looked at Sal, and asked, Do you like it? Sal felt his auction-type brain unconsciously starting to calculate the price of the tool set. He quickly stopped that calculation and looked at the gift with his heart as it was. I really like it. Thank you. Upgrade tapped his shoulder and smiled brightly. To apologize for yesterday and to welcome you to our team, everyone pitched in a little. She gestured with her chin to the other crafters who were bowing their heads. Sal raised his head and said, Thank you so much. Then he recalled what Porge had told him. The crafters here were people who took care of each other. Since there's still an hour left until class, if you have any items you want appraised, just bring them. I'll look at them for free today. Soon, seeing all the crafters approaching him with items in their hands, Sal burst into laughter. He closed the tool set, gestured to the person who came first, and said, There is just one condition. The man who was about to hand over the item stopped his hand, looking a bit nervous. A look of anxiety briefly flashed across his face. Your name, what work you do, and one embarrassing story about Upgrade. Just tell me that. The surrounding crafters burst into laughter, and even Upgrade smiled at her bench. Please say it loudly, so Upgrade can hear too. The principal's order was to teach the dungeon, but honestly speaking, the danger of the outside world won't really hit home for kids like you. Sinclair pointed his hand over the podium behind him. Beyond it, the cityscape was revealed. You are alive despite being weak. That means you grew up in a safe place. And that is a weakness you must overcome while you are here. Your survival instincts will be terrible, and if you go outside in that state, you will die quickly and painfully. Sinclair continued in a calm voice. Now, raise your hand if you think you can fight a monster here and win. So I looked back and was startled. More than 10 students were raising their hands. Sinclair wasn't surprised at all and shook his head as if disappointed. I haven't even said what kind of demon it is. Yet you already think you can win? Good. Everyone who raised their hand, come forward. He reached out and pointed to a student in the crowd. Not a chance. You raise your hand too. Come out before I drag you out. Some students moved awkwardly, but there were those who walked forward proudly. Sinclair looked at them and let out a deep sigh. Who knows what a prowler is? When a few nodded, Sinclair knelt and opened one of the equipment boxes. He took out a skull with a long and pointed shape from inside and put it on his hand. The teeth were in 2 rows, all sharp and hideous. Sinclair stood up and held the skull up for everyone to see. This is a prowler skull. It's the demon you will encounter most frequently, right after vampires. Tell me about the biggest characteristic of these guys. There, starting with you. Among the students who nodded that they knew the prowler, the designated student answered. The manual says they are Qui. Quiet, that is what is written in the manual. The content omitted there is as follows. Sinclair looked at the students for a moment and continued. These bastards are faster than you, stronger than you, and if bitten, a limb will go flying. But the truly worst part is, they are predators that hunt in packs, and you are all prey. Sinclair looked around at the students whose expressions had changed from before and continued. Now, who thinks they can fight this guy and win even now? Sinclair raised the skull once more and looked at the students who had raised their hands at the first question. 8 of them lowered their heads, or smiled awkwardly, but 4 still didn't lower their hands. He sighed and started taking off his shirt. Just to stay for the avoidance of legal issues, I clearly warned these students that they would surely die in front of a prowler. But these friends are the ones who claim they could win. If 4 must die to save 96, I will make that choice anytime. Gesturing toward the staff waiting on one side of the arena, Sinclair instructed them to come forward. The medical team will come to save you only after you start bleeding profusely. Make sure to thank them when you wake up. So I wanted to look at Divinity to verify if she knew what situation this was. But the moment he saw the look of terror rising on her face, he thought he didn't want to know. He had run to the main auditorium in a hurry after finishing the workshop. But all that had happened so far was Sinclair, the newly appointed professor and hero, listing off what terrible things could happen in the Red Zone one after another. There were no faces he knew among the students who raised their hands. But Sal couldn't help but be curious about how Sinclair intended to change their minds. Lastly, let me state to everyone watching this. The scene you're about to see is a single prowler acting alone, revealing its presence, breaking away from the pack, and commencing an attack. In the Red Zone, it is rare for all these conditions to be met. It's a fairy tale-like situation that is extremely considerate to greenhorns. Reality, actual combat, battlefield, whatever you call it, know that no matter how strong you are or how cool an ability you have, that moment could be the threshold of death. You right here in this spot are in a state unprepared for the cold reality of monsters. With those words, Sinclair threw his shirt to one side and sprang forward with amazing speed. In an instant, his pale skin disappeared and his body was covered in sleek black fur. What? Kayak! Screams filled with terror burst out among the students, and more than half stumbled backwards, while some already burst into tears. Sal barely kept his balance, but seeing the sight of sharp teeth biting into a student's shoulder right before his eyes, he also thought he didn't know when he might collapse. The professor, no. The prowler's body landed on the ground, tumbling over the student's shoulder, and before anyone knew it, he mercilessly threw the student he held in his mouth, sending him flying toward the medical team. In less than a single second, the first student fell. None of the students who had confidently raised their hands could even activate their abilities, and in that interval, the second student also fell with his chest and legs torn. The prowler's forepaws shredded flesh and bone, and what followed was the terrible sound of bones breaking and the victim's scream mixed with sobbing. Of the remaining 2, one completely broke down and collapsed on the floor, and the other started running away just like that. The prowler kicked the fallen student's head to knock him unconscious and started walking, slowly chasing the fleeing student. The entire silver cohort held their breath and watched with eyes stricken with fear, and the gasping and desperate crying of the fleeing student echoed in the classroom. Then suddenly the prowler sprang up. It was insufficient to describe it as a charge. It was as if a black shadow teleported. It flew behind the student's back, pounced on him just like that, tore his back with claws, and suppressed him in an instant. Sal felt his knees right there. Sinclair, having returned to human form, was coming back while whistling cheerfully. In one of his hands, the ankle of the last student he took down was held, and without any politeness, he dragged him and threw him in front of the medical team. The medical staff glared at him, but Sinclair handed over the student without a word of apology, then turned around to check the entire class. Now, I will ask again. Raise your hand if you think you can fight a monster and win. The students were all bowing their heads with frustrated expressions. Even the students who could barely meet his gaze had faces that were blank and spaced out. Sinclair picked up his shirt and put it on, letting out a hollow laugh. Everyone lacks a sense of reality. Don't let your guard down just because you're sitting inside a tower like this. What you're doing is all training. Do you not know the meaning of training? Think about what your real job is and what your future is. It is to go out there, fight the monsters you just saw, and reclaim the land humanity has lost. Sal held his trembling legs with his hands and thought about what mindset he had during the few days he came to the academy, and what he came here to do. If that had been a real prowler pack just now, how many of you do you think would have survived? Sinclair paused for a moment and shook his head from side to side. Well, in your current state, not a single word would enter your heads. Let's stop here for today. In the next class dash. He clapped his hands once as if he realized something. It's no fun if I say it. You can just experience it yourself tomorrow. What? Did you miss us that much? Upgrade asked. Watching Sal walk to his workbench, she seemed genuinely curious. But as Sal got closer, her smile disappeared slightly and soon bloomed brightly again. You came back from meeting Professor Sinclair. Laughter burst out from other workbenches too, but gazes of sympathy were mixed within. That professor? Ugh, he's harsh. Sal sat down without any reply and looked at the workbench in front of his eyes. The event he just experienced replayed in his head repeatedly. He knew the red zone was a dangerous place, and he knew substantial threats existed there, but actually seeing such a brutal and violent attack right before his eyes had no sense of reality at all. Sal slowly looked around the room. He wasn't looking at anything specific, just letting his gaze drift blankly. While doing so, he suddenly realized he was living in a fairy tale-like world. He could make cool items and could do upgrades too. But could he possibly stand against such powerful monsters with things like item appraisal or crafting gloves? Even though Sinclair deliberately adjusted the level, Sal was shocked to the bone. His classmates all had the same expressions, and after that, the sight of other cohort kids laughing and chatting while spending time was completely incomprehensible. Only the fact that they hadn't met Sinclair yet explained their attitude, and Sal barely suppressed the anxiety rising again. Snap out of it. Upgrade snapped her fingers and made a sound in front of Sal's eyes. Sal blinked and looked up at her, and she looked at him with a slightly frowning face. You're thinking too much right now. You just had a slight taste of reality. But you shouldn't flounder in anxiety or worry because of that. It's a process every student goes through. And Sinclair is, in a sense, the best professor in this academy. He saved countless lives, because he made kids like that drop out. Don't become one of them. Upgrade placed her hands on both sides of the toolbox she had gifted him in the morning and pushed it in front of Sal. Don't just sit here worrying blankly. Use your ability. That is exactly the way to flip the board. You can do it. Sal slowly nodded, but still had a drained face. Upgrade smiled slightly and said, If you're that exhausted, I guess you don't have a mind to review the contract sent down from above. She lifted the toolbox, and underneath it lay an official document with his name written on it. A sealed wax stamp was attached, indicating it was real. Sal held the letter in his hand and looked at it for a long time. What decision did the upper floors make? Upgrade tapped Sal's workbench with her finger and leaned her body close. If you don't open it right now and tell me what's written? Her impatience made Sal want to drag out the time for no reason. But actually, he was curious too. He opened the toolbox and took out a sharply honed precision chisel. Using it as a letter opener, he tore the envelope, leaving the wax stamp untouched. Upgrade looked at him with a gaze, saying that was absurd, and Sal waved his hand as if it was obvious. I could just restore it. That way, I can pressure them for more supplies while pretending I haven't even seen the content inside. While he unfolded the letter, Upgrade came behind his back and started reading the content over his shoulder. Securing the right to work in the workshop, this is good. She mumbled her thoughts like a monologue as she read down. Non-exclusive contract? You really won this well. Ooh, even providing materials? You'll receive new materials every few weeks. Wow, this is cool. Sal was reading much slower than Upgrade and was barely following the part she pointed out, but decided to listen to Upgrade's commentary instead. I can read it slowly by myself later. Bonus. That's rare for contracted workers. But they say they'll give it if you just meet the goal, and with your level, this is a piece of cake. And this is the best part. If you forego the bonus and accumulate points, you can buy things here with them, without fees or brokerage charges attached. Upgrade leaned closer and whispered, Lucky guy, you want a really decent contract. Earning credits, buying things from above without fees, and even getting material support. Since it's non-exclusive, you could do appraisals too if you just get tokens from other guilds. Upgrade let out a sigh, shook her head from side to side, and returned to her seat. Make sure to accept. She spun around as she sat at her chair, then stopped facing Sal again. But I'm curious, what are you going to make with those materials? Sal answered without hesitation. It was something he had been planning in his head from the moment Sinclair pounced on the students. Armor exclusively for prowlers. As soon as Sal answered, Upgrade's laughter rang throughout the workshop. Then, realizing Sal had a serious face, she laughed even louder. Sal quietly waited for her to finish laughing, and the single remark she finally said made a chill run down his spine. That's so fun. If you want to test that, I'll mention it to Sinclair. He'll probably pounce on it with excitement. The cafeteria was bustling. This was one of the few places where students from different cohorts could mingle simultaneously. Class schedules were organized differently throughout the day to rotate various classes and faculty, but lunch and dinner times operated according to a fixed timetable. Sal knew the cafeteria operated almost all day, but no one wanted to miss the core hours when set menus were offered, because it was the difference between a sandwich or a steak. When it was finally his turn, Sal ordered and configured his meal to his taste with just a few yes and no's. Then he picked up orange juice and headed to an empty table. Sal. Suddenly, Divinity appeared and called out from the opposite side. Her plate was full of what looked like a pile of vegetables. It was the complete opposite of the steak and mashed potato combination Sal received. She sighed as she sat at the table with Sal. Still out of it, because of that class. How about you? Her voice was tinged with fatigue. Sal looked at his tray and sighed. Noticing he hadn't picked up cutlery and was staring blankly at his meal, A steak knife and fork came sliding across the table toward him. He smiled as he accepted the cutlery divinity handed him. Future sight is the best. So how are you holding up? After eating silently for a few minutes, Sal shook his head. I feel like I'm the only one so detached. Glancing at the tables where laughing and chatting students were sitting, he simply couldn't understand how they could be so carefree. I wonder if there really is anyone who can fight such people. No monsters. Sal shuddered and took a sip of juice. Meanwhile, Divinity had a look as if she realized something. It's because you didn't see the combat practice before that class, she said with a sigh of relief. You don't know yet how strong the kids in our grade are. Since the silver cohort is mostly supporter types, there aren't many star class talents, but did you know there were people who succeeded in defending against Professor Sinclair? What? Sal dropped his fork and stared blankly at Divinity. Divinity nodded. It's true, there were a few. You probably didn't see, but there was a kid moving like lightning. That kid dodged all attacks. Couldn't take down the Prowler, but didn't die either. Also, some girl fired a barrier to trap the Prowler and protected other students too, and some guy struck the Prowler away in midair during the first attack. Divinity's voice grew increasingly excited. There are already many people doing well. We just need to do our roles well too. Only then did a smile slowly appear on Sal's face. But Divinity seemed to have more to say. Sal, I can see the future little by little, you know. I've seen a lot of how great of a job you do. Divinity picked up a cherry tomato, popped it into her mouth, and grinned. So don't think too much and just do what you're good at. Not all of us were born to fight on the battlefield, right? Finishing her words, Divinity winked and started eating again. Sal smiled and said, Thanks. That was comforting. Seriously. Divinity rolled her eyes. I knew it. Told you I see the future? If it weren't for me, you probably would have been sitting gloomily all week, doing nothing. She laughed, gesturing roughly around the cafeteria. Sal, if you want to get into the Savior class, you have a lot to fix. Sal raised an eyebrow. Suddenly the goal is the Savior class? Divinity nodded and tapped her head. I saw the list roughly, you know, but you weren't seen there. I guess maybe not. Sal saw for the first time that she wasn't sure about the future. Why aren't you sure? Divinity sighed and shook her head. I caught the announcement ceremony exactly, but I can't see any faces. All I figured out so far are code names. But there was a code name like Oracle too. Do you know who that is? Although she pretended to be sulky, Sal could feel Divinity was quite excited about the thought of getting into the Savior class. But you know, the future I see is only one possibility after all, and everything could change. For example, remember that barrier user I mentioned earlier? When I saw before, she wasn't even a candidate for the Savior class. But suddenly a possibility appeared. What changes people is always an event. Like what happened with the Prowler. Things like that can completely change our future. Listening to Divinity, Sal thought of Hannah. Did Hannah getting a rare grade item perhaps influence that? Leaning back on a chair, Sal organized his thoughts. I can make someone get into the Savior class with equipment I made, but I myself can't get in. At that moment, Sal reconsidered that theory, and eventually felt his own conceit was funny. Divinity rattled off names of kids she couldn't see well, and one of them caught Sal's ear. Wait, that last name appears in your vision. Divinity nodded. Mythos? Yeah, he's there, but he's totally like a ghost. There's zero information. Her annoyed tone melted away as soon as she saw Sal smirk. Sal pressed the door button with his elbow to close the automatic door. His hands were full carrying materials and the tool set gifted by the crafters, so he was short of hands. Originally, he contemplated leaving it in the workshop, but after the auctioneers on the credit floor provided a new tool set, he decided to bring the top grade set to his room. Losing a few uncommon grade tools wouldn't be that big of a blow, but if he lost rare grade tools, he was confident he would faint on the spot. After finishing his meal, Sal called his father for advice on the contract, and Pietro gave several suggestions to make the contract more favorable. Sal passed those suggestions to Porge, and not even an hour later, he received the revised contract and returned to his room. Somewhere in his head, the words Divinity said kept lingering. The words that Hannah was able to rise to the upper ranks thanks to the equipment. Even in bed, she had said how strong the equipment made her feel, and Sal came to think that maybe he could help other people in that way. He barely suppressed the urge to lock himself in his room and immerse himself in the workbench right away. He realized he'd been moving too spontaneously until now. Okay, then let's organize what we know now. Sal placed the tools and materials on the workbench and returned to the bedroom. Mythos Crafter is my skill, and I can craft items of all grade from common to mythos, at least as far as I know. Talking to himself, Sal took out his tablet and organized all the information he knew. Upgrade and restore are also included in that ability. Recalling the memory of refining the gauntlet, he roughly wrote down the energy consumed by each action. Without crafting skills or experience, with just essence, only small to medium-sized rare grade items are possible. Each note like this was clarifying his weaknesses. Parts can be reinforced with essence, but stamina consumption is high and it leaves black residue. Sal turned his gaze to the bedsheet and vowed to wash it before sleeping. He opened another tab and started organizing crafting ideas. Although the idea for armor stemmed from his own fear, it wasn't a foolish thought. Approaching it commercially, any student who experienced Professor Sinclair even once would have a high demand for protective gear. But how do I block a prowler attack? Sal mumbled as he opened a new tab and started organizing a list. Should I learn rune crafting or learn how to implant students' abilities into equipment? He didn't want to become a crafter relying on just a single skill. He vowed not to be satisfied with just learning the self-charging rune, but to learn other rune patterns as well. Although he had seen countless runes with his eyes over many years, he had never properly studied any of them. His eyes stored that self-charging rune in his head like a template, and Sal could utilize it by engraving it onto a surface. He hoped that someday he would be able to handle other, more powerful runes at that level. About an hour later, Sal looked down at the tablet and confirmed there were at least 12 tabs open. Each tab organized factors to consider. He sighed, turned around to activate the console, and started looking through various options accessible to him there. One of them was the internal store, where Q credits could be used. Premium coffee was 2 credits, Sleeping Tiger drink was 20 credits, and subject pre-registration was a whopping 100 credits. Fortunately, Sal was selected for the crafting class, so that cost was waived, and for the administration subject, no one wanted to take it, so there was no need to compete. But the analysis subject cost money. The Q credits initially given to him were 600, but now they have been reduced to 490. And that was despite only having been in the university for a few days. Sal was browsing the store's category list looking for items needed for his room when he discovered one interesting item: weapons and equipment. Sal adjusted his posture to see the screen properly. The list was enormously vast, and for the first time, Sal felt a bit confused. He could check photos of the items, but his eyes didn't provide any information beyond that. Ultimately, he had to read the product descriptions, but even those descriptions were excessively vague. He wondered if perhaps he had too high standards for products. Then I should look at only crafted items. He selected the filter, but there was almost no noticeable change in the list. That's how many items were crafted. Rare. Only when he clicked the rare grade filter did merely dozens of items remain. Some of them had fixed prices listed which were unimaginably expensive, and the rest were being sold in an auction format. Sal clicked on a gray breastplate, which looked quite similar to the uniform he was currently wearing. Checking the detailed information upon clicking, it was made by a third-year student. Gray armor. Scale armor handcrafted by 34th rank Pavi Mackles. Each scale was carefully molded by hand, and total production time reached 2 months. Made of refined cobalt-infused steel, emitting a blue glow upon gray when activated. Gray armor is impervious to direct hit-type attacks, and possesses resistance to prowler claws. Starting price, 300 Q credits. Sal shook his head at the crude appraisal result. If it were a real rare grade item, there should definitely be much more diverse effects than what was written now. Especially reading the nonsensical part about cobalt infusion again, he frowned. Is that real, or just marketing lies? He was about to open a new tab, but recalling the reason he entered the store in the first place, he sighed and returned to the main page. He just wanted to bring something like a bulletin board into the dorm to write down to deuce, but the university store surprised him once again. Entire dormitory renovation. Sal shook his head, looking at the price. Who would spend 5,000 Q credits on something like this? The sorting criteria was set to high price order, but because he double-clicked the console, the most expensive item popped up on the screen. Sal clicked inadvertently, and what unfolded before his eyes was surprisingly a luxury penthouse apartment. There were several rooms, and Sal pressed each one with trembling fingers. Not only a workshop equipped with industrial equipment seen on the industrial floor, but there was also an alchemy station and a rune assembly table. In another room, various fabrics and a bunch of mannequins were prepared. Excluding a hot tub, the most impressive part was that there was a practical training room. 5,000 Q credits. Sal held his breath, looking at the screen. Per month. Clicking the price sort again, cheap items purchasable with even 5 Q credits appeared, and Sal finally felt a sense of relief. Still, a question suddenly arose. Could he really earn that much money? Rare equipment is 300 credits. Could I not do it? Somewhere in his head, an image of himself becoming rich began to be drawn. Sal glanced at the timer next to him and stretched. Having worked for nearly 5 hours straight without a break, he knew he should get some sleep now if he wanted to endure the next day. Or should I just buy premium coffee tomorrow? Sal muttered as he pushed the timer out of his view. His eyes returned to the work in progress. The dull gray uniform had already transformed into a completely new form, but the work was not finished yet. Sal let out a sigh of resignation, opened his tablet, and pulled up the image of the rune he intended to engrave. Since his eyes couldn't read information from static image, Sal sketched it by hand, hoping his eyes would grasp the intent. Please. Sal looked at the most recently completed blueprint and spoke as if groaning, then focused his eyes again. He flowed his ability into the rune, but there was no reaction. It had been like this all night. Sal was reaching his limit. On the screen next to him, as if mocking him, Intensive Basics of Runes was displayed. Price, 50 Q credits. This material created by a third-year student was a compilation of class notes, summaries, and tips, and Sal pondered as he read the description several times. It's content I'll learn later anyway. Am I desperate enough to spend credits on this now? Sal gritted his teeth and poured power into the rune once more. There was no reaction. His terrible engraving was not recognized, even by his all-seeing eyes, as a target capable of upgrade or refinement. In Sal's eyes, it was just a terrible scribble with nothing to improve. Damn it, I don't know. Sal eventually rationalized it to himself and purchased the lecture. Puzzled by the download time being longer than expected, Sal checked the file composition. Surprisingly, that student had organized everything from daily journals, weekly summaries, assignment analysis, to tutorials. It was much more substantial material than expected. Sal let out a sigh of relief and opened a video that seemed to deal with the problem he was facing. And whenever you draw a line, make sure essence is always flowing through the needle. Otherwise, the rune becomes incomplete. Personally, I like keeping the entire line straight and consistent, but some people re-inject essence intermittently to strengthen specific parts. Strengthening runes is especially important when engraving multiple runes on a single piece of equipment, because each rune ends up competing for the same essence resource. In this case, the method of strengthening weak runes to balance with strong runes is effective. Sal paused the video and rummaged through the toolbox, finding a tool similar to the needle seen in the video. It looked like an old-fashioned fountain pen, but the tip was a triangular blade, tapering down to a sharp point like a needle. Realizing he was skipping steps, Sal started searching separately for a video explaining how to inject essence into the needle. Soon, a video of a student using a less impressive version than the high-end tool in Sal's hand played on the screen. It contains a small fragment of a core. The common model needs charging after just a few days, and charging costs a certain fee. But uncommon or rare grade sets have self-recovery runes engraved so the creator can use them anytime. If you are serious about becoming an engraver, purchase an uncommon grade engraving tool as soon as possible. It will completely change the game. This engraving tool is currently fully charged, but it doesn't have a magical signature yet. This signature is unique to each user, so it is essential. There are two ways to imbue this. The first is a method for people with high essence control skills, which is directly pouring out your own ability and infusing it into the engraving tool. But even if you can't control energy that precisely yet, don't worry, because there is a second method. Just prick your finger with a needle tip to draw blood. It might hurt a little, but since essence flows in blood, that alone creates your unique signature. Those clumsy with energy control can avoid falling behind in class with this little trick. For several hours, Sal watched at least 12 videos posted by graduates and learned a tremendous amount of information he hadn't known. Before he knew it, dawn was breaking, and he realized he had no choice but to rely on premium coffee to get through the day. His body was exhausted, but his head was still burning with enthusiasm, itching to apply the tips and tricks he just learned to crafting immediately. Let's start with this first, Sal muttered, lifting the engraving tool he held in his hand. Sal imagined drawing out one of his essences and connecting it to the core fragment inside the pen, flowing a little energy into it. The tool started working immediately. It even seemed like the needle tip was glowing faintly. Then now, shall we see if it works well? Sal straightened his back and looked at the numerous rune sketches scattered on the desk. All were engraved on scrap pieces of cloth. He didn't want to try directly on the gray uniform and ruin it. Even if restoration was possible, wasting essence was a foolish act. Please let work this time. Sal started redrawing the rune with the engraving tool that was fully charged and connected to essence. Until now, he had used a carving blade because he thought that made sense at the time. But this time, a clear trace of pulsating energy was left from the needle tip of the engraving tool, and he was surprised to feel almost no essence being consumed. When he put runes into the gauntlet previously, it was at the level of pushing a crude stone with force to engrave. Knowing he might make mistakes, Sal didn't want to solve everything relying only on his ability. He wanted to do really well properly with his own skill. Please, just a little more. Sal closed the pattern, completing the final line. Surprisingly, even after the needle left the surface, power continued to flow along the line. As if it were a racetrack, the power ran along the line. Seeing parts where the speed slowed down or moved with difficulty in between, Sal unconsciously refined those lines. Then the flow became faster again, picking up speed, and soon the entire rune began to emit light. Wow! Sal's eyes went wide. I did it! Sal's eyes informed him that the rune was a small protection rune, and already upgrade methods to evolve the rune and new patterns began to appear in his eyes. Not wanting to waste any more time, Sal carefully moved the completed rune to the side and brought his gray uniform to the center of the desk. Now he knew what he had to do. Sal quickly turned the timer to reset it, then looked at the sun rising outside the window. Rise a bit slower. I just started. Laughing, he pulled up the list of runes to engrave on the uniform. All were basic runes, but they were perfect to use as a foundation for upgrades. This idea had come up while organizing the various materials he received. Sal felt it was wasteful to use those materials on items to sell to others, and rather wanted to find a way to utilize his ability efficiently and cheaply. In Sal's opinion, there was no method cheaper than engraving runes on the existing uniform and reinforcing it with his ability. Of course, some materials or essence would cost, but compared to crafting a completely new item from scratch, it was an incomparably cheap choice. Sal concentrated on engraving the runes, biting his lip and frowning. His eyes gradually began to resonate with the blueprint, sending suggestions on how each rune could harmonize. To be precise, rather than suggestions, they were closer to patterns Sal could understand. He took a step back from the workbench and smiled with satisfaction. Small streams of light finally began to flow along the patterns, but it seemed it would take some time to circulate through the entire circuit. The first rune Sal made was the size of his palm, but this time 5 different runes were connected by complex lines tangled like a spiderweb. Each rune was arranged to transfer its magical energy most efficiently, and Sal instinctively understood how it worked. He realized at once which runes should be placed where and how they should be connected to maximize each other's performance. What the? Sal blinked at the sound of the timer ringing. He turned off the alarm and looked out the window again. The sun had risen much higher. Do I have to shower and go to class already? He let out a groan and headed to the bathroom. And only after throwing one more proud glance at the uniform did he enter the bathroom. He wondered if he would have time to finish even the upgrade before class. After finishing his shower, he decided he had to upgrade the uniform. Otherwise, it was obvious he would be distracted all day. So upgrading the uniform now could be called an investment for learning, couldn't it? His excuse was somewhat lame, but since his mind was already set, it didn't matter. He took out a few silver ingots from the pile of materials, pondering if they would suit the gray-toned uniform well. Soon Sal started the upgrade, slowly flowing essence into the uniform. It was a completely different feeling from the gauntlet he made in the past. Back then, essence drained out like pouring rain, driving him to the brink of exhaustion, but this time it felt like slowly pouring water into a delicate mold. Following his ability and intent, essence was permeating into every minute groove of the runes. He could have forcibly poured essence or rushed the process, but Sal didn't hurry and adjusted the speed to match the flow suggested by the runes. Then opportunities to refine naturally began to surface, and he proceeded with refinement in ways he couldn't imagine before. When the soft light gradually subsided, Sal stood there as if frozen in place. Sal's power was hardly depleted, and he had used only 1 silver ingot. Yet he had succeeded in creating a rare grade piece of equipment. Name: protection shirt. Origin: crafted. Condition: brand new. Grade: rare low. Size: chest 42 inches, neck 17.5 inches. Material: cotton, refined mythos crafter's essence, reinforced wool. Attributes: defiance, nullifies piercing and blunt damage, and reflects damage with a certain probability. Untouchable: if another tries to forcibly remove the shirt, a counterattack effect automatically triggers. Adrenaline: all abilities of the shirt remain constantly active. Abilities: defiance, untouchable, adrenaline. Power source: external essence. Evolution potential: none. Quality: excellent. Durability: 100%. Estimated value: $12,000, $16,000. The clothes that used to be a dull gray shirt were now shining completely silver, and rune patterns intricately engraved in metal wrapped around the entire garment. While the flexibility unique to fabric remained, it was a shirt boasting armor-level defense. Sal carefully tried on the shirt, surprised by the feeling of it tightening to fit his body perfectly and even correcting his posture. He quickly put on the rest of his clothes, cast one apologetic look at the bed, and left the room. He had a full schedule all day, but only one thought was in Sal's head. Coffee. Caffeine. Coffee. Premium coffee. Perhaps because he was so tired, Sal didn't notice the reactions of people around him at all until he drank a few sips of premium coffee. Sal. With his eyes almost closed, he walked like a zombie to the lobby without talking to anyone, not knowing the class schedule or location. As the magic of coffee began to work, he felt his mind waking up, and only then could he feel people's gazes. What is that? His chest is glowing. He lowered his head to look down at his chest, confirming the silver rune engraved on the shirt was glowing faintly. His gaze continued downward, and he realized how much his top contrasted with his ordinary gray pants. Like wearing a suit jacket with sweatpants. Well, let's say it's close enough. Thinking at least the colors were similar, Sal moved his steps toward the lecture room where today's class would be held. Without even knowing the fact that Hannah, seeing Sal with his glowing chest, hadn't even offered a greeting.